It was February 2019, and John Burris, a noted civil rights attorney who's handled several cases in Vallejo, from civil rights abuses to wrongful death, he was holding a press conference. And the families of Angel Ramos, Ronell Foster, and Willie McCoy, young men of color who were fatally shot by Vallejo police officers. I remember just the energy, because it wasn't just family members, it was people from the community who were there, who had gathered, old, young, and it seemed like after a couple years of covering Vallejo, it seems like the energy just coursed through the crowd. And I remember looking at you and maybe walking up to you and saying, "Man, this feels different. I've seen people upset about what's happening in Vallejo, but I haven't felt this before." And you kind of shook your head, and I remember you like, "This is different." What is different now, in your estimation, in Vallejo?
I think there's actually two answers to that. The first is what's different now, and the second is what felt different then. Maybe I'll take them in reverse order, because the short answer to what felt different then is I don't know. It just felt different.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's different now is that people have more information, that they can see the attempts to deceive them with disinformation. They can compare what's true and what they're being told by city leaders, by the police union, and I think people are tired. They're tired of this happening. Mm-hmm. That's how I felt. Mm-hmm. That's how I feel.
You're talking about information. And I got to say, Jeff, that without you, a lot of this information that I've covered, that other reporters have covered, other news organizations, local and national, you have been doing some digging. And I got to say that the work is impressive, and it shows this compassion for community. You're a Vallejo native, mm-hmm. but I don't think that captures all of it there. Why has getting the information to people so important to you? Just even if we have to go all the way back, but why is that information so important?
You can't have reconciliation without truth. Mm-hmm. I'm reminded of the city's PR campaign, the Unite Vallejo campaign, which is how it started. Mm-hmm. Turns out, as you know, that there was an existing group of mostly young people of color. I think several of them queer, like grassroots, local young people who care about Vallejo had actually already created an organization called Unite Vallejo. Mm-hmm. And I showed, ultimately, I mean, I didn't know this at the time, but sort of everything is serendipity, right? Everything's an accident with this stuff. But ended up showing that the city actually knew that, and they went forward with this PR campaign anyway. Used the name, and we uncovered that, and then the city, at first was pretty defiant, but very quickly changed. I think maybe that group met with the city subsequent to that, and the city changed this PR campaign to Vallejo Unites. The point is, Vallejo's campaign around Vallejo Unites don't rock the boat. As a former college professor of mine, Lauren Nader, has written about sort of fostering harmony ideology, where it's just like, let's just all, not create waves and make sure that we're all being united, but not actually around a given principle. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting, yeah.
The city's campaign featured some of the most violent police officers in Vallejo.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Mark Thompson, Matt Komoda, people who have multiple shootings or multiple civil rights lawsuits against them. It was mind-boggling.
That seemed really insensitive, too, to the people who have experienced violence at the hands of police.
These are the very first people. I mean, the first 3 videos that the city put out, 2 of the 3 officers were, I believe, currently being sued.
Mm-hmm.
2 of the 3. One of them is under at least a formal, technical criminal investigation for the William McCoy shooting. So I think
that's Thompson, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it seems unlikely that he'll be indicted, but or charged. But the point is that there's this strong push from the city, this almost overwhelming push to just get along, get on the same page. We're moving forward together. Mare Island's going to get developed. Everything's going to be good. We're going to have a bunch of money flowing in. And ignoring the reality that Vallejo, according to NBC News research, has the highest rate of officer-involved shootings in Northern California and the 3rd highest in the state. And according to the Police Scorecard Project, that project had found that Vallejo used more force per arrest than 98% of all departments in California's largest cities. Mm-hmm. Open methodology, sound data science. But they actually just updated their numbers, and now it's 100% that Vallejo uses more force per arrest than 100%.
So it's now top Stockton.
It's there might be a handful tied at the top.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't looked at the data that closely, but it recently is 100% of all cities. So I just don't. You can't come to consensus if you don't have the ability to make an informed decision. There's no consent if there's not informed consent, and so.
But okay, let me interject here.
Sure.
You're saying consensus. What I'm seeing as an observer is a willful ignorance from city leaders who, when presented with data that shows problematic behavior by officers, they would rather spend the time, energy to push back on that message instead of investigating why it's happening. Mm-hmm. Do you see it like that as well from your interaction with city leaders on?
Oh, yeah. I think it's hard to not see it once one starts to pay attention to it. That was what was so shocking for me. I think probably for you, for anybody. I mean, I'm a litigator by training. I don't really practice anymore, but keep up my bar license, and I have had perfectly pleasant interactions with ferocious and very talented opposing counsel, like from law enforcement agencies, from government, from big firms. It's just, I mean, this is not normal. Like, you get on the same page and then you figure out where the differences are, and then you try to narrow the issues further. And if you have to fight about something, you fight about stuff that matters. You fight about policy. You fight about philosophical differences about how things should be. But here, it's just it's an abusive relationship.
Wow. Okay.
And it's authoritarian, frankly.
We kind of crossed paths first time, I believe it was after, so William McCoy was fatally shot in a Taco Bell drive-thru on February 9th, 2019. Mm-hmm. I think soon after we crossed paths. I'm thinking back on it, I by then I had been covering Vallejo, and I just didn't understand why there wasn't more of a groundswell of attention to the behavior of not only the police officers, but city officials who wouldn't condemn problematic behavior. I live in Oakland. I also work in the East Bay. I know if the same incidents had happened in Oakland, you would have people at City Hall, you'd have people marching through the streets, but you would also have our elected officials on city council speaking out. Mm-hmm. Same thing in San Francisco. We would have people, elected officials and activists speaking out. Mm-hmm. In Vallejo, it seems as if the activists who show up to city council, the few who do regularly, they want to somehow silence them or tamp down their agitation.
Oh, including taking what I view as illegal measures to do so.
Okay. But still, city leaders who are, elected officials aren't speaking forcefully about the problem with the police officers. One thing that I believe that Open Vallejo has done is not allowed city officials to, I guess, be willfully ignorant about things. You put constant pressure on them. Was that something you set out to do when you started filing the public records requests?
I might frame it a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
To my mind, what I was setting out to do was just to ensure that there was an accurate record
mm-hmm.
for officials if they want to kind of check themselves and take a step back and realize that maybe they were perhaps even inadvertently buying into some groupthink or a narrative that might not be accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know in advance, what's going to be the case until I research it, right? What's going to be accurate, what's going to be reality. And I work, and Open Vallejo works, we work very hard to ensure that we're accurate and fair and thorough.
Mm-hmm.
Very well documented, in part because of the active disinformation and misinformation that is put out there by city officials. And so, which at this point I do believe that's the case, that it's intentional disinformation. Mm-hmm. And that's really quite chilling, I think. And it will backfire. But, it's not so much... I want them to do the right thing.
Mm.
And my ability to say what is the right thing and what is the wrong thing now that I'm turning this, this is going to be a news organization, is pretty much limited to opinion pieces and analysis and things like that. I think that it was a bit of a turning point when I realized, thankfully fairly early on, because the backlash and the pushback was so intense in a way that I've never experienced before, that my attempts to approach city officials, including people who should be professional and engaged, like the city attorney, for example, Claudia Quintana, my attempts to approach them in good faith to try to lend some of what I know and my experience to help was met with ferocious opposition and, at the very least, strong disinterest.
Okay. For those listening, you might not know that this is the first time that I've had Geoff King on his voice. People are hearing his voice for the first time. Also,
man of mystery.
Open Vallejo is launching.
Yep.
I have a question about that, but first, tell us a little bit about what Open Vallejo is and the umbrella, what you're trying to start with that news organization.
Sure. So Vallejo is a news desert, and in some ways it's been a news desert for a long time. It is just far enough from San Francisco and just far enough from Sacramento,
Mm-hmm.
just working class enough, just out of the way enough that nobody's paid a lot of attention. I want to make clear that I'm not denigrating in any way the efforts of local journalists, both within the Bay Area and the region, but especially at the Vallejo Times-Herald. This is a problem that is happening all over the country. The
over.
Yeah, the Vallejo Times-Herald has one news reporter.
A single for a city the size, 122,000?
About that, yeah.
How?
And John Glidden is an amazing journalist who is almost single-handedly providing this vital component of democracy to a city 120,000 times, more populated than just him. And so Open Vallejo started as an experiment, and now I would say it's more of a lab full of experiments. So Open Vallejo is and will be at launch a full-service investigative news organization. We're going to focus on investigative and explanatory reporting and expert analysis, as well as voices from the community, which I think is vital. And I want to do this as a very high-quality project. But we're still able to do a lot of this on the cheap. And so what we're going to do with Open Vallejo, which is a project of the Informed California Foundation, which is our brand new nonprofit, is see what works in Vallejo, which is just a perfect storm of brutality and corruption and neglect based on everything. I'm not saying that solely just to opine. I mean, based on everything that I have discovered thus far, things that we published, things that we haven't, it is, my hometown is uniquely, I think, troubled. And there's just this amazing community clamoring, hungry for more than being abused like this. And so, and I'm speaking broadly, like there are lots of examples of good public servants, public officials, people doing the right thing. But I think the overall picture is really bleak, really dark, really, again, I think the word that comes to mind is authoritarian, anti-democratic. And so the idea is Open Vallejo is going to provide high-quality investigative reporting in a small city that has been neglected for far too long. And it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be painful. It could, if we do our work right, end up resulting in serious professional and maybe even legal consequences for some of these officials.
Wow.
Based on their own conduct that they're already engaged in. But the broader idea is to then open source it, to see what works here and try to figure out what's universal about it, both our successes and our failures, to document and reflect, hopefully really thoughtfully, about what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, and what can be replicated elsewhere, not by us so much as people in their own communities. So we're not coming into, we're not going to say, well, we're just going to parachute into Kern County or Mendocino or Compton or Shasta County, and we're going to fix, whatever's wrong. Not the plan. The idea is there are people in those and every other community doing this work right now. And what we're going to try and do is figure out how to lower the barriers to entry, which includes us building technical tools for the scraping and processing of public records. We will host public records. We will engage in strategic litigation, and we will engage in high-impact, targeted, for example, enterprise reporting, investigative reporting, as a supplement to and support for local efforts around the state. So that's the idea, is to go hard in the paint in Vallejo and then try to figure out how those lessons might be applied by other people elsewhere. Toolkits, trainings, resources, and reporting.
As you know, the city of Vallejo had to hire a law firm to handle the volume of public records requests. Majority came from Open Vallejo. To this point, Open Vallejo has reported without a byline. And anyone who's followed Open Vallejo's Twitter or Facebook feed knows that Open Vallejo is focused on transparency within government. That's my words. But you like to show, well, this is what I requested. This is what I got back. This is what it means. It has provided a lot of information to residents, other journalists. But let me share you some words that have been used to describe Open Vallejo.
I hope the accusation that we're a terrorist organization is in there. Go ahead.
Well, you just dropped it.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to spook you.
So one council member said that that he gave no credence to those who spread lies and rumors and things like that. This is based on reporting on public records. That council member characterized Open Vallejo's news article on Randy Risner, which we'll get into, as a public lynching. This person said that Open Vallejo was no different than the Klan or a terrorist organization. Jeff, now that you're coming to this, you're launching Open Vallejo, you're unmasking and accept, or stepping outside of the anonymity. You mentioned targeting news or targeting reporting, but it seems like you might be walking or setting a target on yourself or Open Vallejo now that the city officials who didn't know who was behind it. How do you feel about that now? This is me. This is what I've been working on after a year of reporting. Here I am. How do you feel about that coming to this now?
Sure. It's a great question, and it's one I've thought a lot about. The short answer is twofold. One, it's not just me. And that the officials who – it's interesting. When you look at commentary online, for example, there's a lot of people who actively say, I don't care who Open Vallejo is. Like when people say, hey, who is this? Like, why don't they unmask themselves? There are a number of people who say, I don't care. They're just doing this service for the community and they're showing their work, so who cares? And certainly when this started, the idea was there might be the potential for retaliation based on things I'd heard about others who had tried and who had spoken out on matters of public concern, using their First Amendment rights of speech, press, petition, assembly to do so. And there's a reason I'm bringing that up. But the twofold answer is this. One, the folks who really seem curious, first of all, I'm shocked that not everybody knows. It's not like it's been a big secret. Careful what you wish for, y'all. Like the people behind this project, I've got a good resume for what I do.
You do.
I hit the educational jackpot. I am so fortunate. My bio is the crappiest bio of anybody on our website. I am in powerful, good company. It is not just me. And so I think that there's going to be some regret on the part of officials who have been calling so strenuously for this unveiling, because now they're going to know what they're up against. And I would not want to be up against any of these people. And when I say up against, I don't actually mean this is not an advocacy project. I thought about that. I really spent a lot of time thinking about, well, what's the most needed work that I can do because I've done both.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is high quality, accurate, fair, truthful journalism, I think is going to be what makes a difference. So the first part is you say you want to know, but I'm not so sure you do, but you're about to. The second part is I've spent my entire career in press freedom.
Mm-hmm.
My most recent full-time position was directing a global press freedom project for a major human rights NGO. I've litigated, my first case I ever worked on as a baby lawyer was against the CIA. I've sued the FBI on behalf of clients. I've sued police departments and won on behalf of clients, litigated against police departments. I was the co-chair of the Society of Professional Journalists Freedom of Information Committee for 4.5 years. We actually just won a Press Freedom Award from that organization.
Mm-hmm.
I have taught, it's funny, the outside counsel for the city has done quite a bit of chastising Open Vallejo about journalistic ethics and made some interesting, strange arguments about privacy versus public interest. I've taught a privacy law class at Berkeley for almost a decade. This is not to brag, but the point is,
You're saying
I'm open to their criticism, but I also feel well equipped to deal with any illegitimate pushback. We will actively correct mistakes. We will adhere to established journalistic principles and in fact, best practices, journalism ethics. We will do everything lawfully, as we have done, and we'll continue to have a professional voice. And we hope that city officials will approach us with information if they see that something is wrong. Mm-hmm. This is not just about the people currently in power. Even if our reporting ended up cleaning house, which I think is sort of, not necessarily going to happen, but certainly there will be, there have been examples made. This is as much about trying to set norms or reset norms that are already kind of established and agreed upon and there's consensus around, like democracy, and serving the people, being servant leaders. But for the next crop of people, as people term out, and not just the city council, but staff, that, just lining up the incentives so that you don't want to do shady stuff because you might get caught. And there might be consequences.
And I think for my, from the reporting that I have done is acknowledgement of, if there is a problem, it's best to acknowledge it, and then let's work on a correction together instead of doubling down on.
That's democracy, right? You represent the people. It doesn't matter what party you are. It doesn't matter what you have to set aside your own personal views even, right? It's not about you at that point. You place yourself into a position of trust and privilege. It's a privilege to be up there. It's a privilege to be sitting where I'm sitting, being able to try to help. And so you previously used the word condemn, right? Why don't they condemn this?
Instead of condemning the messenger.
Maybe just acknowledge and agree to work on it. Try. That's really, it would go a long way.
So, speaking of condemning, one of the most vocal council members, first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about the piece on Randy Risner that you reported? Because that's where I think a lot of the council members took an opportunity to chastise Open Vallejo and its reporting. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Sure. Again, this is sort of a careful what you wish for or elevate kind of situation, because the Randy Risner story was the lower half, if not lower third, of the draft homepage that I've been building.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they all freaked out. But this was a relatively minor story compared to what's coming.
And this is on launch.
Some of it. Because we're launching March 15th, some of the bigger stories, one of which we've talked about, things that might make national news. I want to take the time to make sure that those are done right. There are distribution agreements. That kind of thing goes wide and far. Randy Rissner was going to be on the homepage at launch, but he was not going to be the top story. Randy Rissner is now the interim Vallejo city attorney, and he was voted in 7-0 after our story ran. Randy Rissner has been fired or left under duress as city attorney from 3 separate cities in Southern and Central California, all 3 of which, so he's been an attorney since 1994, all 3 of which are 90+% Latinx communities, small agricultural communities where he came in and he was making a lot of money, and he ended up getting fired from 3 of them. Now, to be fair to him, he was a contract attorney. He was at a firm. But there were major missteps, including being caught by now one of our advisory board members who went on to get a PhD in dark money and politics, who as a 22-year-old reporter caught Rissner giving advice to violate the Brown Act after he'd been an attorney representing municipalities for over a decade. Like, this is basic stuff.
So you're saying he should have known better?
Yeah. Well, the 22-year-old cub reporter did.
Who is that?
Stanislav Joe.
Yes.
He's great. And I was going to call him up to, just as an aside, I was going to call Stan up to get some help on the story. But what ended up happening was the city agendized Randy's appointment. So they're like, oh my God, I have to write this. People have to know before the appointment. That's the thing. People have to know. It's not about me or Open Vallejo or you stopping or manipulating a situation. It's just people have a right to know what's happening.
I feel the same way about elected officials.
I would like to know if a guy who had been fired from 3 cities was about to be made the city attorney when the city of Vallejo is facing enormous liability for ongoing, avoidable, internationally infamous civil rights violations and alleged civil rights violations. I'd want somebody capable with good judgment in that situation. So not only was Randy Rissner fired or forced out of 3 different cities, the first one, there was a weird municipal bond deal that ended up under investigation that the city participated in. I mean, it was bad, the circumstances. Suboptimal anyway. He was also sanctioned by a federal bankruptcy judge, sanctioned for money. It was $200, but he's sanctioned for money for conduct, quote, tantamount to a fraud on the court, where he had accepted client funds and then not paid the filing fees for those clients, which they found out about later at a hearing that he did not even attend, so they couldn't get their bankruptcy discharged. And I reached out to him, and he provided about 1,800 words of comment in writing, which I think I generously incorporated throughout the article, which I had researched. I'd started researching at least 6 months prior. I'd requested public records from these cities. I'd read all of the prior reporting. There's nothing factually wrong with the article that I am aware of or anybody has made me aware of. And so I incorporated his comments, and which didn't, in my view, refute anything. They just kind of spun, but they didn't really actually refute anything. And so had to put it out. And believe me, I did not want to put it out right before his appointment because I actually helped somebody move from LA to Sacramento. So the appointment was agendized Thursday night. Friday, I worked on it a bit. I then went to Sacramento, and at 5:30 in the morning on Saturday, got up, went to the airport, flew to LA, loaded somebody's stuff into a rented van, and drove it back to Sacramento, and then helped them move in, and then got back to work.
I've done that drive. I can imagine.
Yeah, and I started in Sacramento in the morning, and then LA, and then back, and moving. So I didn't want to write a 1,500-word investigative piece. I paid a professional news editor who'd been a cops reporter out of pocket just to make sure I was being fair and just to catch any little mistakes, fix any grammar errors. Like I spent all of Sunday on it and then published. And it got retweeted by the deputy managing editor of ProPublica. We got a very nice note from Pulitzer Prize winning reporter. The piece is accurate. And about 2 or 3 hours before the city council meeting to appoint Rissner, the city put out an updated agenda for that city council meeting, putting a closed session on the agenda. I still managed to write a letter saying, I think this is illegal. You can't do this, because the only way you could change an agenda like this is if there's a, quote, emergency or dire emergency under the Brown Act. So that means like a work stoppage or a terrorist attack. So it's kind of ironic that we were called a terrorist organization. That would be like the only way you could justify doing this. But I've seen blatant Brown Act violations over and over and over and over again. To a point that it's just, I mean, I have no faith in the city attorney that it wouldn't keep happening. And so they changed the agenda. They pushed everything past midnight. People tried to stay. A couple people still managed to speak on it. And then we got called